Basically, we're going to cover the... no, can we start again?
Carry on, start again.
Right, we're going to explain about British values. We're going to be covering radicalisation, individual liability, hate crimes, democracy and the Equality Act. And at the end, I'm just going to basically conclude what we've found from those as well.
The first one we're going to talk about is the Equality Act. It came into force on the 1st of October 2010. There's 9 pieces of legislation, which are the Equal Pay Act, the Sex Discrimination Act, the Race Relations Act, the Disability Discrimination Act, Employment Equality, regulations, the employment equality with sexual orientation, the employment equality with age, and then there's a part 2 which is also for sexual orientation. There are further elements that didn't come into force in October, which were the provisions relating to auxiliary aids in schools, and elements what won't be coming in. Sorry, the ones that I've just said will come in the future, may come in, but the ones that won't definitely be coming in is the Gender Pay Gap information. Yeah.
Is it? Are you going to click?
Oh, no wonder it's up there. Mind your back. You don't wire.
Right, so what is individual liberty? Individual liberty suggests the free exercise of rights genuinely seen as outside government control. The Department of Education has published guidance on promoting British values in schools to ensure that young people who leave school are prepared for modern life inside Britain. The guidance aims to help both independent and state-maintained schools understand their responsibilities in this area. So all the schools have a duty to actively promote the fundamental British values of democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty and mutual respect, along with tolerance, and those of which they have to... mutual respect and tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs. These values were first set out by the government in the Prevent strategy in 2011. Some of the examples in schools, colleges, universities promote individual liberty through things such as encouraging the students' voice in lessons, encouraging students to make choices knowing that they are in a safe and supportive environment, and encouraging students to know, understand and exercise their rights, personal freedoms and advice.
Okay, so radicalisation is the actual process of causing someone to become a supporter of terrorism or forms of extremism that then leads to terrorism. It's often thought to stem from religious views and beliefs. However, it is about a state of mind, the perception and feelings of people who are threatened by identity and of social inequality. So ISIS have grown like a brand via social media. They do paint a seductive picture and act as a compelling recruitment drive that inspires then the most vulnerable to join their cause. It's also been argued that ISIS's social media strategy could rival some of the biggest brands in the world, with ISIS members holding over 45,000 Twitter accounts. So it's often seen like as in grooming, as if they're looking for the most vulnerable via social media and stuff to like target the vulnerable to get them to then join up and things. So those the signs there are people who's got like feelings of grievance and injustice, the need for identity and belonging. So the most vulnerable that they aim for are like youngsters from the age of 13 and upwards. Those experience like identity or personal crisis, one with feelings of unmet aspirations and a sense of injustice, and also socially isolated. So the vulnerable the vulnerability are exploited, similar to, like I say, grooming youngsters online with promise of excitement, empowerment, glory and freedom. There may be a fighter in Syria bragging of like military accomplishments, offering help and encouraging them to join, and then to someone who's vulnerable or socially unaccepted, this attention then, you know, drags them in. It's quite compelling to them, and so that's why they do join. So the atrocities of September the 11th, it's not just simply an attack on a foreign nation, but it was seen as an attack on the Anglosphere, on all of us who then believe in freedom, justice and the rule of law. So no single measure is going to reduce radicalisation in the UK. Now, what we need to do is combat it by targeting the at-risk vulnerable groups and assisting them into society. Now, we could do this by helping them find jobs, better integrating like the immigrant populations into the local cultures. So by teaching children from a young age and maybe putting it into the school curriculum about learning them about citizenship, democracy, rights, justice and fairness is where the changes need to be made, really. Start from a young age and in educating them about things like this. Thank you.
So I'm going to be talking about democracy. So the official meaning of democracy is that it is the belief and freedom and equality between people, or a system of government based on this belief. So from this power, this can either be held by elected representatives, so for example the government, parliament, or directly by people themselves. So there's two main types of democracy. So there's representative. This is a form of democracy that is based on decisions of elected officials, so like parliament, that represent a group of people, or there's direct. This is a form of democracy that the public have the right to decide on. So for example, we're lucky enough to have the power to vote. So from this we can see that we are a democratic country because we are able to participate in decisions that are made. A lot of countries do not have this right, so we are very lucky to have a voice. Unfortunately, for countries such as Cuba, who are a communist state due to all the powers belonging to people of higher class or title, it is sad that the general public do not have a say in decisions, and they're not considered when decisions are made. So like people like the government, parliament take us into consideration most of the time. People in Cuba aren't considered at all, they're actually considered as slaves, and human rights violation is a common occurrence. There are people that have had a huge impact on democracy and human rights. So for example, I'm sure you all heard of Martin Luther King, and there's a picture of Nelson Mandela as well there with some quotes. So Martin Luther King was a democratic socialist and fought to bring publicity to major civil rights activities and efforts. He encouraged the act of being able to protest without violence whilst still having a good impact. And the most important thing that I think we all remember him best for is giving his leadership to African American people and fighting against racial abuse. He also left us with the speech, "I Have a Dream," which I'm sure you've all heard of, and that still inspires many of us today. Then we've got Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years of his life in prison due to his efforts to create racial harmony and equality. From then on, he became the first black president of South Africa and also promoted human rights and a better future for everyone in South Africa. So they both had a huge impact on democracy.
Start. Hate crimes and incidents of crimes or incidents which is targeted at a victim because of offenders' hostility or prejudice against an unidentifiable group of people. Any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on a person's religion or perceived religion. The police and other criminal justice agencies consider all hate crimes to be very serious, including racist and religious hate crime. When a case is prosecuted, the courts can impose a stronger sentence and under powers from the Criminal Justice Act 2003. This reflects the priority placed on these crimes. So what we found is in 2014-15, 52,528 hate crimes there was. 82% of that was race crimes, 11% was sexual orientation crimes, 6% was religious hate crimes, 5% was disability hate crimes and 1% was transgender hate crimes. There are increases in all 5 of the central monetary strands between 2013 and 14 to 2014-15. This shows that as Britain degenerates further and further of values and equality, love and peace are being forgotten, and violence, greed and hatred are on the rise. This is due to like the teachings from peers alike. If we want a peaceful Britain, we need to start from a young age and show our kids that it's morally wrong, and in general for getting someone against the race, gender and even colour of the skin. As Brits, we're the only ones who teach people right and wrong, but as families we don't seem to be teaching this to our children. To conclude, what we've found is radicalisation, individual liberty and hate crimes, these can all be avoided or better understood by teaching children from a young age and teaching them at school and developing that so we can grow as a community and actually try and get this out of the children's systems early on so that we can teach them right from wrong at an early age and try and get rid of this. Democracy. As a country, we're lucky to have a voice and be able to vote and represent, vote our own leaders for our society. The Equality Act, this basically simplifies, strengthens the current legislation to provide Britain against the new discrimination law.
Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?